In the bustling heart of the city, where towering skyscrapers met crowded streets, lived Alexander Reed, a man whose life was defined by success and wealth. Alexander was a self-made millionaire, known for his ruthless business decisions and unrelenting ambition. To the world, he was a man who had it all: luxury cars, a penthouse overlooking the skyline, and a network of influential people eager to work with him. Yet beneath the veneer of opulence, Alexander felt an emptiness he couldn't quite place. His life had become a cycle of meetings, numbers, and transactions, all lacking any true connection or meaning. Friends, he realized, were just acquaintances with a business card, and love was a concept he'd long dismissed as a distraction. But all of this changed one chilly evening when he decided to take a detour on his drive home. As he navigated through the city's lesser-known streets, the bright lights of a theater marquee caught his attention. Pulling over, Alexander noticed a young woman standing near the curb, shivering in a thin jacket, trying to wave down a cab. She looked entirely out of place in his world, yet there was something striking about her, a fierce resilience in her eyes that intrigued him. Her name was Lila Monroe, a young woman who had come to the city with dreams that never materialized. Life had dealt her a harsh hand, leaving her to navigate a world she barely understood. Struggling to make ends meet, Lila had found herself on the fringes of society, doing what she could to survive, but always holding on to the hope that one day, things would be different. When Alexander offered her a ride, Lila hesitated, eyeing him with both caution and curiosity. The polished car, his tailored suit, and the air of confidence he exuded all pointed to someone from a different world, a world she'd only ever seen from afar. But there was a kindness in his voice that she hadn't expected, so she accepted, sliding into the passenger seat with a mix of nerves and gratitude. Their conversation was stilted at first, a clash of personalities from two vastly different backgrounds. Alexander, used to discussing mergers and acquisitions, found himself lost in small talk, while Lila was wary of revealing too much about herself. Yet, despite their differences, there was an undeniable connection, an unspoken understanding that drew them closer with each passing minute. As they drove through the city, Alexander was struck by Lila's perspective on life. She spoke with a raw honesty, unfiltered and unapologetic, a stark contrast to the carefully curated facades he was accustomed to. Lila, in turn, was fascinated by Alexander's insight into a world she'd never known, a world of power, wealth, and control that felt as foreign to her as the streets she roamed felt to him. By the time he dropped her off, Alexander felt a strange reluctance to say goodbye. Something about her had stirred something deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years. And as he watched her disappear into the night, he realized that he wasn't ready for their encounter to be just another passing moment. The next morning, Alexander couldn't shake the thought of Lila. She'd left an impression on him that no one in his world had ever managed to leave. Deciding to follow his instincts, he made a bold decision. He would find her and make her an offer, a proposition that would bridge their worlds, if only temporarily. He didn't know then that this simple decision would change the course of both their lives. Alexander couldn't shake the feeling of curiosity and excitement that Lila had stirred within him. The memory of their conversation kept replaying in his mind, each detail sticking with him in a way he couldn't ignore. She was so different from anyone he'd met before, unpretentious, honest, and fiercely independent despite the difficulties she faced. The following afternoon, Alexander set out to find her. He wasn't entirely sure how to go about it, but he had connections and the means to pull a few strings. After hours of inquiry and a bit of luck, he located her usual spot near the theater district. There she was, wrapped in that same thin jacket, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. When Lila saw Alexander approaching, her brows knitted with suspicion. She hadn't expected to see him again and was unsure if his sudden appearance was a welcome gesture or a cause for concern. Still, she maintained her composure, meeting his gaze with a steady, challenging look. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to hide the slight quiver in her voice. "I came to see you," Alexander replied, his tone steady and calm. "I wanted to talk." Lila crossed her arms, a mixture of surprise and guarded curiosity evident on her face. "And what could a man like you possibly want from me?" Alexander took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to propose would sound unconventional. I have an event coming up, a business gala. It's a big deal in my world, and I'll be surrounded by people who expect me to show up with someone suitable. I'd like you to accompany me. Lila blinked, caught off guard. You want me to be your date? She laughed, a mixture of disbelief and irony in her tone. I don't exactly fit into your world, Mr. Reed. Alexander, he corrected, a hint of a smile softening his otherwise serious expression. And I know you don't. That's the point. I don't want anyone from my world. I want someone real, someone who isn't going to play games or put on an act. Lila looked at him for a long moment, weighing his words, trying to understand what his real motives were. People from Alexander's world didn't seek out people like her, not without a hidden agenda. Yet, there was something genuine in his request that caught her off guard. What's in it for me? She asked, crossing her arms and raising an eyebrow. Payment, he replied simply. A fair one. Enough to help you out and maybe change things a bit for you. It was a tempting offer, and Lila couldn't deny the allure of financial security. But she had never been one to take handouts, and the thought of being someone's hired date, even for a night, felt degrading. Still, the way he presented it, as if she were a partner in some mutual agreement rather than a mere accessory, softened the discomfort. I don't know, Lila said, hesitating. Look, there's no pressure, Alexander reassured her. It's just one night. You come with me, help me handle the business sharks, and at the end of the evening, we go our separate ways. I'll make it worth your while. After a pause, Lila nodded, her mind racing with possibilities and reservations alike. She couldn't deny that this was an opportunity to get out of the rut she was in, if only temporarily. And Alexander, though guarded and mysterious, had a warmth that intrigued her. Maybe, just maybe, this arrangement could lead to something unexpected. All right, she said, meeting his eyes. But I have some conditions of my own. Alexander grinned, amused by her determination. I wouldn't expect anything less. And with that, they struck a deal, one that would bind them for a single night but would ultimately lead them down a path neither had anticipated. As they shook hands, both of them felt an electric charge pass between them, an unspoken promise that this arrangement was only the beginning of something far more complicated and meaningful. As the day of the gala approached, Alexander arranged for everything to help Lila blend into his world. He hired a personal stylist, arranged for a designer dress, and even set up etiquette lessons for her to get comfortable with the high society expectations. While Lila was initially resistant to all the primping and grooming, she understood that Alexander was giving her a chance to step into a world she'd only ever seen from the outside. The stylist, a charming woman named Celeste, was tasked with transforming Lila into someone who would turn heads among the city's elite. Celeste marveled at Lila's natural beauty, telling her she barely needed makeup to look stunning. Still, there was something about Lila's reluctance, her desire to stay authentic despite her temporary role, that set her apart. She wore her natural charm with pride, and it was clear to anyone watching that she didn't need the fancy dresses or makeup to make an impression. As Lila tried on the evening gown, a deep emerald green that highlighted her eyes, she felt an odd mix of excitement and insecurity. She hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. Celeste placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're a natural, Lila. Just be yourself tonight. That's what makes you different. Meanwhile, Alexander was preparing in his penthouse, feeling an unusual sense of anticipation. He was used to business dealings, to formalities and orchestrated interactions, but this evening felt different. For the first time in a long while, he was genuinely excited to be accompanied by someone he didn't need to impress or entertain. With Lila, he felt a rare ease, a reminder of the things he'd lost sight of in his pursuit of wealth. When Lila arrived at his penthouse, Alexander was momentarily speechless. She looked both elegant and striking, but her genuine warmth and personality shone through, setting her apart from anyone he'd ever brought to an event. He offered his arm, and she took it with a shy smile. The gala was held in a grand ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers, classical music, and well-dressed guests who carried themselves with an air of sophistication. As they entered, Lila felt the stares of curious onlookers, and her insecurities bubbled to the surface. She could feel the judgment, the whispering glances, the unspoken questions about who she was and why she was with Alexander. But Alexander sensed her unease and whispered reassuringly, "Just follow my lead. You're doing great." With each passing moment, Lila grew more comfortable. She found herself enchanted by the stories people shared, though she quickly realized that beneath the charm, many of these people were deeply calculated. She watched Alexander as he navigated these interactions with ease, subtly guiding conversations, strategically placing himself in the right circles, and all the while keeping her by his side, as if she were his anchor in this polished but hollow world. At one point, one of Alexander's business associates, a man named Raymond, who was known for his arrogance, sauntered over. He eyed Lila with an air of dismissal, clearly amused by her presence. "So, Alexander," he sneered, "you finally found yourself someone unconventional." Lila bristled, but Alexander simply smiled, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You could say that," he replied calmly, "but sometimes, the unconventional is exactly what we need." Raymond's smile faltered, and Lila felt a surge of gratitude toward Alexander for standing up for her in a world where she was seen as an outsider. For the rest of the evening, she found herself less worried about fitting in and more focused on enjoying herself. As the night wore on, they shared genuine laughter and conversation, each moment dissolving the invisible wall that had separated their worlds. Lila caught glimpses of Alexander's softer side, his humor, and his intelligence. And in turn, Alexander found himself captivated by her wit and resilience, realizing that her presence was beginning to mean more to him than he'd anticipated. When the gala ended, they walked out together into the cool night air. Lila shivered slightly, and without a second thought, Alexander draped his coat over her shoulders. The silence between them was thick with an unspoken understanding, a bond that had grown stronger in just a few hours. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. "For tonight. I never imagined I'd experience something like this." Alexander looked back at her, a trace of vulnerability in his eyes. "I should be the one thanking you. You reminded me that there's more to life than this." They shared a quiet smile, both of them sensing that this arrangement was no longer just a business transaction. What had started as a simple agreement was turning into something unexpected, something real. And as they parted ways that night, both Alexander and Lila knew that they were on the brink of a new chapter, one that neither of them had anticipated. After the gala, Alexander found himself thinking about Lila constantly. The night had left him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about her. In the days that followed, he reached out to her, suggesting they meet again, under the guise of a business follow-up. Lila, who was just as affected by the night they shared, agreed, though she too felt unsure of where this was leading. They began to meet regularly, each encounter deepening the connection they had stumbled upon so unexpectedly. Alexander introduced her to new places and experiences, taking her to art galleries, upscale restaurants, and quiet, hidden spots around the city. These outings were no longer about impressing her or showing her the wealthy world he inhabited. Instead, Alexander found himself opening up to her, sharing thoughts and dreams he rarely voiced aloud. For Lila, this connection was both exhilarating and intimidating. She was stepping into a life she had never imagined for herself, one filled with possibilities and opportunities. Yet, she couldn't ignore the voice in the back of her mind reminding her that this was temporary, that she and Alexander came from two different worlds. Despite his kindness and charm, she feared that their connection would eventually crumble under the weight of reality. One evening, Alexander invited her to his penthouse for dinner. The atmosphere was relaxed, and as they shared a meal prepared by a private chef, they found themselves talking about their pasts, their fears, and their desires for the future. Alexander opened up about his journey to success, the sacrifices he'd made, and the relationships he'd lost along the way. His honesty surprised Lila, who was used to seeing only his confident and composed exterior. As he spoke, she saw a man burdened by his own ambition, someone who had achieved everything society deemed important but felt an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. Lila, in turn, shared her struggles, the dreams she'd abandoned, and the hardships she'd endured. She told him about her family, her journey to the city, and the painful reality of trying to survive without losing herself. Their vulnerability created an unbreakable bond, a rare moment of complete understanding. Alexander found himself drawn to her warmth, her resilience, and her unwavering authenticity. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, someone who challenged his perspectives and brought light into his otherwise structured life. After dinner, as they stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, Alexander turned to Lila, his eyes filled with a tenderness she had never seen before. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Lila, I can't explain what this is," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "But being with you feels right." She looked up at him, her heart racing as she searched his eyes. There was no mistaking the sincerity in his words, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, their worlds weren't as far apart as they seemed. Without another word, they closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a gentle, tentative kiss that spoke of all the emotions they had been holding back. It was a moment of pure connection, a promise of something deeper, something real. As they pulled back, both of them felt a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. They knew this wasn't just a fleeting romance, it was the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. But with this realization came a new set of challenges and questions neither of them were ready to face just yet. Over the following weeks, their relationship continued to blossom, each encounter strengthening the bond they shared. Alexander began to involve Lila in his life more openly, taking her to business events and introducing her to his friends. To his surprise, she fit in effortlessly, her natural charm and sincerity winning over even the most skeptical of his acquaintances. But not everyone was pleased. There were those who viewed Lila as an outsider, a distraction from Alexander's career. They saw her as someone who didn't belong in their world and quietly questioned his judgment. Alexander dismissed these criticisms, but Lila couldn't ignore the whispers and the occasional cold stares. She began to feel the weight of the world she had entered, and the insecurities she had tried to bury resurfaced. One evening, as they were leaving a high-profile charity event, Lila finally voiced her concerns. "Alexander, I don't belong here," she said, her voice trembling. "This world, it's not for me. I can feel it every time I walk into a room." He took her hand, looking into her eyes with a seriousness that left her breathless. "Lila, you belong wherever you want to be. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Though his words offered her comfort, the fear of not fitting in lingered. She loved him, but she knew that loving him meant stepping into a world where she would always feel like an outsider. And as much as she tried to ignore it, the thought weighed heavily on her heart. As the days turned into weeks, Alexander and Lila's relationship faced growing pressures. Alexander's inner circle was starting to question his judgment openly, believing that his relationship with Lila was clouding his focus. To them, she was a passing distraction, someone who didn't align with his ambitious plans or high society image. Despite Alexander's assurances to Lila, she could feel the tension every time they attended an event together. One evening, after a particularly tense gala where whispers and judgmental glances were more evident than ever, Lila finally reached her breaking point. She pulled Alexander aside as they left the venue, her face a mix of frustration and hurt. "Alexander, I don't understand why you keep bringing me to these events if it only causes issues. I can feel the way they look at me, like I don't belong," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Alexander took her hand, trying to calm her. "Lila, I don't care what they think. You're here because I want you here. You're the only person who makes me feel alive." "Maybe," she replied, pulling her hand back, "but it's obvious that I'm seen as some sort of liability. And honestly, I can't help but wonder if maybe they're right. You've worked so hard for this life and I'm just not a part of it." Alexander's face hardened with determination. "They don't decide who's right for me, Lila. I do. And you belong here just as much as anyone else." Despite his words, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that she was becoming a burden, a complication in his otherwise perfectly managed life. She feared that her presence, instead of bringing him happiness, was causing him stress and friction with the people closest to him. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself to walk away, Her feelings for Alexander only grew stronger. One evening, after another long discussion about their relationship, Alexander surprised her with an idea. He suggested they escape the city together, just for a weekend, to clear their minds and leave the pressures of his world behind. Lila agreed, hoping that the time away would help her understand where they stood. They drove to a secluded beach town, far from the bustle of city life. The weekend was filled with moments of laughter and quiet, shared looks, and memories they knew would last a lifetime. Away from the judgmental eyes of others, they found peace, a sense of freedom that had been missing in their relationship. For the first time, Lila felt like she truly belonged beside him, as if they were two souls who had finally found their place together. But as much as the weekend brought them closer, reality loomed over them, reminding them that this escape was temporary. On their last night, as they sat by the fire, Alexander took Lila's hands in his, looking into her eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. "Lila, I know this hasn't been easy for you. But I can't imagine my life without you now. I want you with me, always," he said softly, his words filled with sincerity. Her heart swelled, but she hesitated, knowing the implications of his words. "Alexander, I love you, but I can't ignore the world you come from. It's not just about us, it's about everything and everyone around you. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything." With those words, they made a commitment to each other, a promise to face whatever challenges came their way, regardless of the obstacles. But little did they know that their love was about to face its greatest test, a test that would force them to confront not only their differences but also the depths of their devotion. Upon returning to the city, they were greeted by a whirlwind of rumors. Someone from Alexander's circle had leaked details about their relationship to the media, sparking gossip and backlash. Articles began circulating about Lila's past, painting her in a negative light, questioning her intentions, and accusing her of being a gold digger after Alexander's wealth. The attacks were relentless, and Lila found herself overwhelmed by the media's harsh scrutiny. She could hardly step outside without being followed by paparazzi, her privacy and dignity stripped away by assumptions and lies. Alexander did his best to shield her, but he couldn't control the narrative that had spiraled beyond his reach. One evening, as she watched another scandalous headline flash across the news, Lila felt a sense of despair she hadn't known before. She turned to Alexander, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't do this, Alexander. They're tearing me apart. I feel like I've lost myself." He held her tightly, his voice filled with desperation. "Lila, please don't say that. I know it's hard, but we can get through this together. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." But Lila shook her head, her heart breaking. "This is your world, not mine. Maybe this was never meant to be." Alexander's face fell, the realization of what she was saying sinking in. He knew that he could fight battles in the boardroom, negotiate deals with ease, but when it came to love, he was vulnerable, powerless to shield her from the harsh realities of his life. He felt his own heart breaking as he watched her struggle to hold back tears. For the first time since they had met, they were faced with the possibility of a life apart, torn between their love for each other and the unrelenting demands of the world they were trying to navigate together. And as the night wore on, they both knew that a decision would soon have to be made, a choice that could alter their lives forever. After that heartbreaking evening, Alexander and Lila took some time apart. Lila needed space to reflect on whether she could truly handle being a part of his world, and Alexander respected her decision, though it tore him apart. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander found himself drowning in the emptiness he had once thought he could escape. His penthouse felt colder, his days longer, and for the first time, his wealth and success felt hollow. Meanwhile, Lila wrestled with her own inner turmoil. She missed Alexander deeply, and no amount of distance could erase the bond they had formed. She knew that her life without him would return to the struggles and loneliness she had once known, but she also feared losing herself in a world that seemed determined to reject her. It was a battle between her heart and her mind, each choice carrying risks that frightened her. One afternoon, as she was walking through a small neighborhood park, Lila spotted a newspaper stand with a familiar headline. The article showed a photo of Alexander at a recent event, looking distant and withdrawn. He seemed lost, and as she stared at the image, something inside her shifted. She realized that the world could try to tear her down, but only she could decide her worth. She had let fear dictate her choices long enough. Determined, she took a cab to Alexander's office, her heart pounding as she walked through the polished lobby and stepped into the elevator. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a newfound resolve to fight for the life she wanted, not the life others expected her to live. When she reached his office, Alexander looked up, surprised to see her standing there. He rose slowly, his expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. Before he could say a word, Lila spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. "Alexander, I've spent my whole life letting fear hold me back. I've let others decide where I belong and who I should be. But I'm done with that. I want to be with you, no matter what your world throws at me. I can handle it, as long as we face it together." He closed the distance between them, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. "Lila, I've been lost without you. I don't care about the rumors, the judgment. I only care about you." They embraced, their connection stronger than ever, both of them understanding that love was worth the sacrifices, the challenges, and the unknown. Together, they were unstoppable, united by a bond that transcended the superficial divisions of wealth and status. Over the following months, they faced their share of obstacles. But with each challenge, Lila grew stronger, finding her place in Alexander's world without compromising who she was. She even started her own charity initiative to help those in need, using her experiences to make a difference in the lives of others. Slowly, the media began to respect her for her integrity and compassion, and those who had doubted her intentions saw the truth, that her love for Alexander was genuine. In time, Alexander proposed to her in the very park where she'd made her decision to return to him. It was a simple, heartfelt moment, far from the extravagance of their usual surroundings, but it was perfect. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Lila knew that this was where she was meant to be, not because of the wealth or the glamour, but because she had finally found someone who saw her for who she truly was. Their wedding was a quiet ceremony, attended only by close friends and family. The day was filled with laughter, love, and a sense of peace that neither of them had ever known before. They had both taken a leap of faith, overcoming the doubts and challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. In the years that followed, Alexander and Lila built a life together grounded in trust and respect. They continued to navigate the complexities of their worlds, but their love remained a constant, a steady foundation that carried them through every storm. And as they looked out over the city from their home one evening, hand in hand, they knew that they had found something rare and precious, a love that had defied all odds, a love that had shown them who they truly were. In each other, they had found not only a partner but a purpose, a reason to keep striving and dreaming, no matter what the world thought or expected. Their story was one of transformation, resilience, and the courage to embrace love in all its messiness and beauty. And as they shared a quiet smile, they knew that this was only the beginning of the life they would build together, one filled with hope, passion, and the promise of endless adventures. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Your interest and support inspire us to bring you more captivating tales filled with emotions, twists, and the complexity of life, love, betrayal, and redemption. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. We value your voice and want to hear what you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story, and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Thank you for bringing this channel to life with your views and encouragement. See you in the next story.